Hey everybody, Julian here, practicing lawyer, former big law corporate attorney. Let's watch some Suits together and see how realistic the show is.
Ross.
One time, I drank 3 5-hour energies to stay up all night closing a deal.
1,000 men of Harvard want victory today. For they know that ere only life their Harvard holds sway. So conquer all, O Eli's men. My favorite part.
Maybe I missed the memo when I was in law school, but I don't ever remember hearing or learning about a Harvard Law School song or a Harvard song.
Who is this?
Dude, it's Trevor. Don't hang up. I only get one call. I'm in jail. I tried to hotline support authority. I was drunk. It's all messed up. Look, I know we haven't talked since we fought, but I didn't know who else to call.
So if somebody is calling you from jail, typically it will begin with an automated message saying, hey, you're receiving a call on behalf of somebody at blank county jail. If you'd like to accept it for a small fee, usually it's like 50 cents, maybe a bit more, then hit 1. And then after you hit 1 to accept it, at that point, the person on the other line can talk to you. So it's not really like this scene where Mike picks up the phone and immediately Trevor is talking to him. Also, I don't think Trevor knows at this point that Mike is faking being a lawyer, but I just think this is funny because this is the classic, oh, I'm in jail. Who should I call? Let me call the only lawyer I know. Even if that lawyer only does complex mergers and acquisitions transactions and knows literally nothing about criminal law. There is this stereotype that, oh, if you know a lawyer, that's really helpful because if I ever get into trouble, I'll call that lawyer. And I hate to say it, guys, but most of us lawyers, we cannot help you, and we would be committing malpractice if we tried to help you in a criminal case where we have no expertise.
All I care about right now is keeping my record clean. You don't happen to know any good lawyers, do you?
No, I don't.
Well, Mike may not be lying, because at a top white shoe firm in New York City, it's very possible that there are no lawyers that help with low-level criminal liability that looks like Trevor is being subjected to here. It's unclear what Trevor exactly did. It might be public intoxication, maybe assault, maybe battery, but it doesn't look like white-collar criminal defense, which is probably the only criminal-related area of law that Mike's firm practices. So just like I told you guys, yeah, Mike may know a lot of lawyers. That doesn't mean he knows lawyers who can actually help, practically speaking, Trevor, who's dealing with this criminal case. And by the way, you might be wondering, how do I find an attorney if you've never had to hire one and you don't know any lawyers? And no, this isn't sponsored, but you may want to check out platforms like Yelp or Avo and look at the attorneys that have good reviews. And that's a decent place to start. But if you want more hands-on help for finding the best attorney for your specific case, then reach out to me at my email below and I'll find you a good lawyer.
If your phone rings while I'm talking to Ray, I'm throwing it out of the car while it's attached to your hand.
Eddie Hope and the Managed Floyd, 1959, 3 guesses.
Guesses? Won't be a fool no more. You insult me, Harvey. Don't worry, we won't be late.
I've seen a lot of bougie stuff in big law. You know, Rolls Royces, vacation homes in Aspen and in Vail, because why not both? Huge houses. But I've never seen a big law partner or associate have a private driver. And I'm not even sure who is paying for this private driver. Like, yes, at many big law firms, if you're working late, the firm will typically cover a ride home to your house, whether that's through a private contracted service with a driver or covering a Lyft or Uber fee or a taxi, either way. But a private driver at this level, I've never seen that. And I'm gonna guess that it's Harvey who's paying out of pocket for this, because I highly doubt that management of a firm of this caliber would pay that extra money out of all of the partners' pockets so that Harvey can get a fancy ride around town. And I know that clients definitely would not foot the bill. Apparently in the old days, clients were willing to pay for business class tickets of their lawyers when their lawyers needed to travel places for a deal or to help their clients. But not anymore. Nowadays, clients make it pretty clear. It's economy only.
Just like a private car service, I'm thinking you don't have to yield?
What? Yield? You ran a red light.
That light was yellow.
No, sir, it was not.
Are you calling me a liar?
Liar,
No, mind your business. Okay?
No, I'm not.
Hey.
No one throws a punch, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Taser. Trade insurance, I'll take reports, one at a time.
As much as I'd like to help you out, I'm late for a meeting.
You're not going anywhere, and a statement from you, too.
Police officers are allowed to detain you for a reasonable amount of time to get a statement from you as a witness to a car accident or whatever other crime has recently been committed around you. What they can't do is search your belongings or your person without a warrant. And what they also can't do is force you to answer questions that you don't want to answer. These are your constitutionally protected rights. And by the way, I don't know if it's because Harvey was getting into the taxi driver's face, but why does the cop just completely ignore Mike?
Harvey Specter, I got your order right here.
I didn't order a pizza.
You've been served.
Cab driver hit Ray, named me as a witness in a civil suit. I need to pay Travis Bigelow a visit.
Now that's a creative way to serve someone legal papers. As a reminder, anytime you want to sue somebody, the person who is being sued must be served the actual legal papers that are being used to make the case against them. This is called service of process. And the justification for this requirement is pretty simple. You don't want to allow people to be sued in the legal system if they don't even know that they're being sued. Now there are some weird implications of this requirement, one of which is that if you can't find the defendant, then you can't serve them and therefore you can't sue them. There are some cases where service by mail is allowed or service by posting it to their apartment is allowed, but by and large you need to have pretty good evidence that the defendant has received the papers in order for the lawsuit to go forward. This means that in some cases when people know they're going to get sued, they'll do anything they can to avoid getting served the actual papers. And that's why process servers like this pizza guy can get creative in tricking the defendant into serving them. Sometimes it's just like this guy, posing as a delivery person for food. Other times, the process server will pretend to be a lost neighbor and say, hey, I'm new to the neighborhood and I'm just looking for, you've been served. There's also this folklore story about how one guy refused to come out of his house to receive the papers, so the process server posed as a tow truck to take away the person's car, at which point the guy came out of the house waving, hey, don't take my car, and then he was served the papers. No clue if that's true, but I wouldn't put it past people.
Tough guy. This is a matter for insurance, not a frivolous lawsuit.
You know, for your information, I suffered emotional pain.
Emotional pain? Rub this on your emotional pain.
You condescending.
Look at me. I'm going to warn you once. Do not pursue this matter.
You know, I have been held up at gunpoint 3 times. So do you think a fancy suit and a $500 haircut, that's going to scare me?
You take my driver to court, I'm going to represent him myself. And when you lose, you'll be covering my fee, which is going to be a hell of a lot of haircuts.
So you weren't a one-way fare?
He's worked for me 8 years.
Then you don't have to worry about being a witness because as his employer, you're liable for his actions.
You know, I think you've seen way too many reruns of Ally McBeal.
Okay, the cab driver saying that he suffered emotional damages and that is the basis for his suit, that is a pie-in-the-sky claim that will most definitely get rejected by the jury and the court system. Because proving emotional harm and emotional damages is one of the highest and most difficult things to prove in the legal system. Usually it requires a sustained period of malicious actions on behalf of somebody else who clearly intended to make the other person suffer emotionally. So in a case like this, where there was a car accident and the cab driver suffered emotional damages, maybe from the stress of recovering from the accident, those emotional damages wouldn't be sufficient to be the basis of a legal claim. Now, at the same time, what the driver is saying about Harvey as the employer being responsible for the actions of his driver, that's true. And what this is called is the doctrine of vicarious liability. Vicarious liability meaning that the liability of the employee or the contractor or the person working for the employer will be vicarious and go up to the employer themselves. Now, this doctrine only applies when the employee is acting in their scope of being an employee for the employer. Another way of saying this is that just because somebody is an employee doesn't mean that everything they do can be traced back to the employer and therefore have the employer liable for whatever it is the employee was doing. Like in this case, Harvey's driver was clearly acting in the scope of Harvey as his employee by driving him from one point to another, which was his role as Harvey's employee. That means that whatever he does while he's driving, if he hits a pedestrian or if he gets into a car accident, that other party can sue Harvey through vicarious liability. But let's say the driver is off their shift and they're at home and they're walking down the street and they get into an altercation with their neighbor and there's a fist fight that breaks out. Well, now the other party in that fist fight cannot come after Harvey because there's no reasonable grounds to argue that the driver was acting in his scope of employment as Harvey's driver at the time that the fist fight occurred. So it seems like the driver here may have a case. Let's see how Harvey handles it.
I may as well buy a one-way ticket to Guantanamo.
Not gonna happen.
If I lose, I won't even be able to afford a livery license, let alone my insurance.
That's why I'm gonna be defending both of us. Ray, this goes against every fiber of my being. I'm taking your case. Pro bono.
I don't know what to say.
Now, usually in the big law context, you can't just go out and take any pro bono case that you want. There's typically a process by which management of the firm has to approve for you as the attorney to take the pro bono case. And that's because, of course, the law firm needs to run a conflicts check with the client to make sure that the representation of that client doesn't conflict with the representation of other clients. And it's also a branding question. Does the law firm want to be seen representing that specific client? Also, some law firms will give you billable hour credit for time spent on pro bono cases. And because they're giving you that credit, the law firms are going to care a little more about what pro bono case you're working on, and therefore what pro bono cases will be approved. Harvey probably has enough clout as a senior partner to unilaterally decide, I'm going to represent my driver. But usually, there's more steps of approval than that.
I must warn you that representing yourself at trial is not the...
What's he doing here?
You think you can schedule a meeting without me knowing it? I don't know. I'm privy to all communication between you and the court.
Well, if your driving matched your legal knowledge, we wouldn't be here. Your Honor, this case should be dismissed. It's a matter for insurance.
Insurance only covers repairs. It does not deal with my losses.
What losses?
Because of that accident, I missed my chance to get my taxi medallion.
Can't just buy it next year?
The loan I got expires in 1 week. On top of that, a medallion costs $300,000 this go around. Next year, $350,000.
So his entire claim rests upon the assumption that he would have won this year's medallion.
The hallmark of America is that the little guy gets to see justice done. We are all equals in the eyes of the law. That is why, out of all the countries in the world, I chose to come here.
What do you got to say about that, Counselor?
I say Atticus Finch makes a good speech here, but this is a fender bender, not a multi-million-dollar lawsuit.
Vicarious liability applies to discrimination, harassment, and accidents. Employers are responsible for their employees' negligence.
Court finds a reasonable suit here. Trial starts tomorrow.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yeah, see, that taxi driver knows his stuff with vicarious liability. Whether he has a claim, though, that's another question. What the taxi driver is trying to argue is that because of this car accident, the taxi driver should be compensated in the value of a taxi medallion, which is estimated, as he said, to be around $300,000. And why does he deserve that $300,000? Well, he says he deserves it because if he didn't get into that car accident, then he would have shown up at the medallion auction on time, and he claims he would have won the medallion. Now, if this line of reasoning seems questionable to you, that's because it is. Typically, when we're talking about damages in a civil legal context, like here when you have a tort or a civil wrong by one party against another, the damages are typically limited to those that are expected. And a hallmark of whether or not damages are expected is whether they were foreseeable by a reasonable person. So, for example, in this case, it's foreseeable that the damage to the car is going to cost $5,000. It is somewhat foreseeable that maybe the driver had some physical injury like neck pain coming out of the car accident. But is it reasonably foreseeable that because of this one car accident, he didn't make it in time to an auction that happens one time a year, that he was not guaranteed to win a taxi medallion at, the value of which is hundreds of thousands of dollars? I don't think that's reasonably foreseeable, and I think most juries would agree with me, and certainly most judges would as well. Now, at the same time, I think the way that Harvey responded to the driver's good faith arguments and idealism about the legal profession by calling him Atticus Finch, which was pretty funny, is also so condescending that the judge said, you know what, if Harvey's not going to even take this guy's argument seriously, we're going to have a trial. But something tells me that Harvey's going to win.
When the accident occurred, you were on your way to the medallion auction. When and where was this auction to take place?
9 a.m. City Hall.
According to the police report, the accident occurred at 8:53 a.m. That means you only had 7 minutes to get downtown in rush hour traffic.
Objection, irrelevant.
I believe when I made the same objection, you told His Honor it was highly relevant.
Overruled.
You were running late, only the stakes for you were much higher, weren't they?
These things never start on time.
Then why was the first medallion sold at 9:03 a.m.? You were scared your chance at a medallion was going up in smoke, and you ran a red. Then you used the accident to paint me and Ray Benghazi as a couple of scapegoats.
You can't prove that.
What color was the light?
I take the fifth.
You can't take the fifth, Mr. Santana. This isn't a criminal case. What color was the light?
Cut me off.
You claim to love our legal system so much. Answer the question. What color was the light?
In civil cases, you can still invoke the right against self-incrimination if the answer to that question could lead to criminal liability. Now, in this case, whether or not the driver answers that the light was yellow or the light was red would not lead to criminal liability. So he can't invoke the right in that context because there's no criminal charges pending here. Now, at the same time, he could still choose not to answer. But if he chooses not to answer, because this is a civil case and not a criminal case, the jury of this case could be instructed to draw what is called an adverse inference from the driver's non-response. And what that basically means is that the jury could assume that the answer to that question is the worst possible case scenario for the driver. In other words, the jury can assume that his non-answer means that the light was in fact red, and that the driver did in fact run the red light. Also, you might be wondering, why not just lie? Wouldn't it be easy for him to just say yellow and lie? Well, yes, it would be easy for him to lie and say that the light was yellow, but then he would be committing perjury. And perjury is a real felony with real consequences.
Your Honor, can I sidebar with opposing counsel?
We can roll the dice with the jury, but I'd rather settle.
How much do I have to pay?
Nothing. You take responsibility for the accident, and your insurance company makes Ray whole. In return, I waive my right to collect legal fees.
Of course, Harvey's a good guy after all, not coming after the taxi driver for like $20,000 in his legal fees. But as a side note, what Harvey asked to do here, aka sidebar with opposing counsel with the judge, that's a real thing. That said, judges do have discretion into whether or not they want to allow a sidebar to happen. Usually there has to be some good cause reason for why one person wants to sidebar. And also, the jury is not supposed to hear any of the conversation that's happening during the sidebar.
For you.
What's this?
I'm very happy you took Ray on pro bono. You, on the other hand, can afford our services.
You want me to pay me to represent me?
10 hours, $1,000 an hour. I'll let you do the math.
You can't be serious.
Didn't I tell you that normally you have to get approval from management for pro bono? Alright everybody, that's it for this episode of Suits. Drop any corrections or comments or feedback in the comments. And remember, if your goal is to be like Harvey Specter or Mike Ross from Suits and be a practicing lawyer, then check out the $5 guide to getting into law school down in the caption. I wrote this guide with all the tips and tricks and insights that I learned on my path to getting into Harvard Law School so that you could do the same. We have a free Discord server for mentorship where I answer every question on the house. Link is also down in the caption. Hit that sub button. If you're not subbed already, I appreciate you. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.